Hi there, and welcome to the Multiply You podcast, where we showcase top experts in their space and reveal all the secrets you need to know to multiply you.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Austin Clark here, host of the Multiply You podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This episode is brought to you by my company, Moxie Pest Control. We're growing. I've got another guest on, Caleb, that owns Crazy Ant Pest Control, who's also growing like crazy as well. As we were getting to, a lot of the times I'll hop on with guests, we'll kind of get to know each other and brief a little bit and prepare. And before Caleb and I could, look down at the clock to start, we've already been talking for 15, 20 minutes and we're like, hey, we got to do this because we've got hard stops at the top of the hour and we won't even record the episode. And so it'll be really good to be able to have him visit with us about some of the ways that he's grown the last couple of years. And not only that, but different ways that he has used a lot of the 4-hour work week and Tim Ferriss's framework to be able to step out of the business. But we are growing just like he is growing. One of the ways that we've done that the last several years is via acquisition. And so if you own a pest control company, if you've thought about getting out, if you're wanting to golf more and service homes less or run your business less, please give me a call. You can reach out to me directly on my cell at 480-254-9730. You can also email me directly at aclark@moxiepestcontrol.com. It's never been a better time to sell. I don't say that just because it's self-serving, but I also really mean it. Home service companies are following the same trend as the housing market for whatever reason. And so I think that the bubble is kind of burst, but selling prices and valuations are still at an all-time high, even though they've come down just a little bit the last quarter or so. Finally, Michael E. Gerber, author of the E-Myth, he and I have co-authored the E-Myth vertical book for the pest control space. And we are releasing and launching that together in Phoenix Thursday, November 3rd in the evening. And it has been a strenuous process. It'll be the first and last book I write or co-author, but it was a real neat experience to be able to do that with Michael. And so we're wanting to share that with the pest control industry, and he'll come to keynote that. So if you're interested, you can reach out to me the same way. RSVPs are really filling up. I'm actually worried because we've had so much interest that we'll have to change venues. We're not doing that yet, but that we'll have to change venues to be able to accommodate more people because we've had a lot of outpouring and a lot of outreach. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I've got Caleb here of Crazy Ant Pest Control. We really hit it off as we kind of, like I said earlier, got to know one another and got to be introduced. Caleb, thank you for being here on the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Just go a little bit in my background a little bit. We were talking before the show started, but when I got started in pest control, I had like that entrepreneur seizure. I was the number one tech at the branch I was at. There was 40 techs. I had the highest numbers every month after month. And I was like, okay, let's just do this. Let's make it happen. And then when I got into it, I didn't have any money, a map, any mentors. It was just, chuck in a truck, get in there. And so 7 years ago, that's where I was at. And even looking back at those first weeks and first years, I wish it was weeks, but it was first years in the business. I was working 12, 14 hours a day, probably for the first 4 years of the business. And I remember one time my truck broke down and I didn't have the $75 for a tow truck. So I started pushing my work truck to my house. It was 1.5 miles away. And people like pulled over because they thought I was pushing it to the side of the road to like help me. And I was like, well, I just—
You're like, no, I'm not going here. I'm going there,
And this is my life. I was getting up at like 5 a.m. and I had to find out like at 10 o'clock at night, my brain stopped working. And I'm trying to reply to emails, do billing, put advertisements out. And I don't know, maybe everybody's been there. Maybe a lot of you are smarter than I was. But I think around 3 years ago, I would say there was probably a major shift in how I started doing things. Somebody talked to Michael Gruber and then the 4-hour work week. And I'm reading through this thing and I'm like, how do we start to— I know this is probably overused, but we need to start pivoting. And one of the major things I did was I noticed a lot of people would hire their next person for growth, but not to take something off their plate. And so like, we need a salesperson. And so we're hiring a salesperson to help with the growth, or hiring a tech so we can handle these accounts. But then they found out it's one more person that they have to manage. And so by every person they add, they're actually adding something to their to-do list rather than something coming off their to-do list. And so the bigger they get, they thought this was going to relieve a headache, but it was actually making the stress go more and more, until some guys I had guys coming up to me and saying, hey, I want to go back to a one-man operation. Do you want to buy my extra accounts off me? And they're just like, I never want to work with employees again. I think just be, one guy in a truck. I'm just keeping the customers I like. That's it. And I got to the point where I'm like, for this thing to scale, every single person I hire, I had one criteria. How are they going to make my life easier? Because if they're just here to grow, it's going to add an extra few hours of training, mentorship, tracking their KPIs, following up on their complaints. And every person I was adding at the beginning was actually adding to my workload. Yes, they allowed us to grow, but they were taking my 10-hour day to a 12-hour day to a 14-hour day, which wasn't sustainable at all. And so I had to totally put a spin on that and say, hey, what are we going to do to make sure that, what are they going to take off my list so I'm actually working less hours in a week? And I see people all the time, and they're hiring people and they're growing, and they're not realizing with every person they're bringing on, they're actually adding to their workload as well. And using that framework, and you talked about Tim Ferriss, the 4-hour work week. And I feel like I'm just talking over you. You're standing there, you're nodding. You can jump in if I feel like I just dominated where I'm going right here in my personal story. But using that framework of, I think for Tim Ferriss, and it was so many years ago, I can't even remember this whole book, so I'm probably gonna get everything. But I remember him hitting a point where he didn't really care if his business died or not. And that's what led to his transfer. It was just the point of a breaking point. And I was like, well, how can we do this in a smoother way? How can we get to this where it just, okay, how can I get to where I can take one Saturday a month off? I know that sounds crazy, but 3 and 4 years ago, that's where I was at. Just one Saturday. I remember when the next person I hired, I basically said, hey, we're looking for somebody that can work Saturdays, that Tuesday through Saturday, so you could take something off my plate. And so I'm having somebody that could work Saturdays. And then first person, I just asked for one Saturday a month. And I'm like, that was kind of dumb. So the next person that came in, I said, hey, you need to work 2 Saturdays a month. And so now I have a person that can work 1 Saturday a month and a guy that can work 2 Saturdays a month. And now I'm down to working 1 or 2 Saturdays a month. And of course, the next person that comes on, same thing. And now finally, after 3 hires, I'm now down to a 5-day work week. And I basically just took that method and I kind of applied it to everything. And then the next step was not only with the hiring, but how can we make this easier? I think a lot of what you do is make it easier for people to run their business. So they're not having to work with all this peripheral stuff, and they can kind of just focus on what they need to do to grow their business. And this goes on a myriad of ways. And I can probably talk about what happened 3 years ago. I'll talk about what happened 15 minutes ago. We walked in here, we have a safe, we have a check-in and out system for our keys. And, maybe a lot of you have the same thing. You have a safe, you have a keys for all your customers, and there's a key that's missing. We don't know where this key is. And so walked in and said, all right, well, what is it to get a tracker, a GPS tracker for every one of the keys? And out the door, taxes, keychains, whole 9 yards, $29 a key. And so we wrote it up. So you're like, so how many accounts do we have that we need keys for? And we're about 50 accounts. All right, let's do it. Let's make this process simpler. And so for $1,500 or whatever, if we can simplify this process. So, $1,500.
You'll never have to worry about losing keys ever again. You'll know where every single one of them is.
100%. And the reason I'm using that illustration is because it's from right before we were talking.
Yeah.
but that's the goal, is like every week, every day, what are you doing to simplify that process? And that's really where you get to that 2 to 4 hour work week. But I will say there's another element in there, which we could talk for hours about. And that's also building a staff that the morale and the staff just it doesn't tank when you're gone, which is a whole.
So Caleb, let's back up just one step. I want to know what it was for you, because there's a lot of people that listen to this that are still in the field. They're where you are 7 or 8 or 9 years ago before you started. And you were a top performer in a large company of 40 plus service people, best numbers and key performance indicators. Your performance evaluations were probably incredible. Things were probably good. You probably didn't know how good you had it, but you were probably making good money, and your day could start at 7 and end at 4, and you never had to answer a phone call that related to business. So what was it for you that made you say, I want to, or I need to do this for myself? Why, like, how did you come to that?
Really, I sat down and I remember I was at Starbucks, and I had a way that I process every single one of my days. Basically, I ate snacks between every one of my services. And then I went to Starbucks for an iced coffee, and I would listen and read for my lunch breaks. And it just hit me, what do I need to get to the next level? And they obviously came up to me in this time and like, what, do you want management? Where are you looking? Do you want to run your own branch one day? And I really had to think, where am I going in this process? And I did the math, and I said, well, if I saved every penny I made, and of course, isn't it with interest or anything like that, but if I saved everything I made, it would take me 20 years to become a millionaire. And that's without eating, paying taxes, anything. If I put it all to this side. And I was like, well, what do I need to do to get to the next level? And I basically came to the realization, I have to own the company. And obviously they weren't going to give me their company. So basically the next thing is the thing I had to start. And I went down this rabbit hole of starting a company. And, it's the number one way people become self-made millionaires in America is just starting your own. And I didn't know it at the time, but the more I got into it, maybe you've learned the same thing with pest control and maybe service industries as a whole. I love the service industry space. I absolutely love it because it's the only place that can scale with your growth. You can't do that in a restaurant. You spend $2 million to put a restaurant up, and your first month is your best month. Where service industries, you can start small and you can just scale them. They're amazing, but I digress in that side right there. And I just came to this moment that if I keep on doing what I'm doing, I'm just going to be spinning my wheels my whole entire life.
So you kind of, like you said, had that entrepreneurial seizure, if you will, but more for you, it was, hey, I'm not necessarily unhappy with what I'm doing, but what does it look like to be able to get to the next level? And for you, it was, I need to go and do my own stuff. And so you did. Things were probably difficult for the first few years, like they normally are. I heard a lot of 10-hour days, 12-hour days, 14-hour days. But then about probably 3 or 4 years ago, it seems like you started then to make conscientious decisions of how to take your time back. And some of that was inspired by the 4-hour work week. And I've never really thought of, hey, the next hire, what is it that they can do to take something off my plate? I think that you probably learned that a lot earlier than me. I feel like I just found that out like maybe a year ago or 6 months ago, because when I think about it, I'm like, okay, I'm working 50, 60, sometimes more hours a week. For me, it's never been like, how can I work less because I really enjoy it? But how can I have someone else do? So I'll give an example. Something that's really dumb that I've held on to up until like 6 months ago was payroll. There's entire systems that like do all of your payroll for you. But for me, I just wanted to like audit it 2 times a month and approve it, like click that literally final approve button, not because that makes me feel any type of way, but just like, hey, I've had a couple of people review it. I've had department heads review it. Now I want the final revision and to be able to say, I'm submitting it. If anything bad happens, it's my fault, sort of thing. And that was really, and that probably took me 2 or 3 hours, 2 times a month. So, there's definitely some hours that were there. And now it probably takes me 15 to 20 minutes 2 times a month because I've got someone else who's incredible that has been trained and is much more detail oriented than I am and catches things that I didn't. We never have a problem normally with underpaying people. It's usually overpaying people, like clerical mistakes or errors. When you underpay people, you find out about that really, really quickly and you correct it really quickly. So I learned early on that you don't make those types of mistakes. But no one ever complains when you accidentally pay them more. I found that too. And so, for me, I'm like, hey, this used to take me 4 to 6 hours a month. Now it takes me an hour tops. So now I just got 4 or 5 hours back. What am I going to do with that? And it's always been exciting to me to think, man, now I can focus either on bigger picture stuff or people development or do another podcast a week. You know what I mean? Or whatever it might be. So what were you just like, Caleb, feeling a few years ago, like burned out and you're like, I just have to take a Saturday off to go to the beach or sleep or not be out there and spray? I mean, how did that happen for you to have you think, I've got to start hiring people that can do things for me so that I can do other things? And by the way, even if it's just like sleep or not work or travel, like that's okay too. No one has to be a workaholic crazy person like me to say, well, I'm going to work these hours no matter what. And so what is it that I'm doing? It's also okay to like go on family vacation or turn your phone off for a day.
Yeah, exactly. And so right now, I usually will turn off my phone, and it's amazing how much I do it more and more these days. Like right now, this is amazing because 4 years ago, I clocked a single day and I took 50 phone calls, an average of 5 minutes each. And
250 minutes. I mean, what is that about? I mean, that's literally 4.5 hours ish of just calls.
And I knew something had to change on just that phone call side. And so now I can literally turn off my phone. I think last week is a good illustration of this. I had my phone off most of last week. And that is amazing to have, to be on radio silence and have a company that can run itself while you're on radio silence. And for me, it was probably just straight out burnout. Like I'm a marathon. I feel like I can take on anything. You throw it at me, I'll figure it out. I'll make it work. But I mean, I'm talking about going 4 or 5 years and 12 hours, 6 days a week was just the norm. And it was finally getting up to almost a breaking point, and where something had to come out. And what you said, if anybody listening right now hasn't done that, I pay probably $150 a month for everybody to clock in and clock out with their phones. They're GPS tracked. So you have to be, at their site or at their location. So you can GPS their clock in, clock out. And then that goes directly to their hours, and it goes directly to a software. The software does their taxes, their whole 9 yards. I have an office manager audit it. So good for you for auditing it. I don't think I've looked at my payroll in over a year. I probably should. I'm probably like, I probably should actually look over it. I just look over those final numbers, and if they look, nothing looks weird, but I probably spend 30 seconds on that. But if somebody hasn't done that and automated that process yet, yeah, definitely do. It's not as expensive as you may be thinking to take that off. But I just need to get away. And was I doing anything amazing with that time? Probably yes. It was exactly what you said. It was spending time with my family, and it was sleeping. It was making sure my body wouldn't fall apart and my family wouldn't fall apart. So that was critical, because you can only put that much strain on those around you for so long. And unfortunately, I think I have an amazing marriage, a great family, but I pushed the boundaries a little bit during those years. And
Caleb, one of the things that you said that I really like, and look, everybody that's listening, in the beginning, for those of you that have been there, done that, for those that are considering doing it, you will know from experience soon. You've got to do what you've got to do. I mean, earlier on, Caleb shared an experience where his truck broke down and he didn't have $75 to have it towed 1.5 miles to his place. And so once you make sacrifices like that and do that, and you've been in business for a little while and the money's starting to come a little bit easier than it used to, you can start to make decisions, and as Caleb has, to be able to say, hey, so now I do have $75, and now it makes sense for you to call that tow truck rather than take, I mean, I don't know how long that took, but it probably took you a minute, a couple hours, or it took it took you longer to push it to your house than it took to have a tow truck take it to your house. And so what you did there is you exchanged money for time. It reminds me, I had Perry Marshall on, and he is a student of the 80-20 rule and the 80-20 principle. And he put out, gosh, I'm forgetting it right now. I'll come back. I'll put it down in the comments or in the link when we publish this. But he created a book that was really impactful for me. It was really short, like 20, 30 pages. But one of the illustrations, and lots of pictures, I like pictures, but one of the illustrations or case studies was like, hey, how are you spending your time? And like, what are these tasks worth? And so what I did at the time, and if I'm ever feeling like I'm getting gummed down in the business, I say, hey, here's $10 an hour tasks. Here's $20 an hour tasks. Here's $50 an hour, and $100 and $1,000 and $10,000 an hour. And so I'll record literally everything that I did that day, and then like distribute it to say, okay, I audited payroll. That was maybe not a $10 an hour task, but maybe that was a $20 an hour task or something like that. I took the trash out. Why did I do that? I mean, I did it because it was probably bothering me. That might be a $10 an hour kind of task, right? And if you're not careful with your time and are able to say no, you'll find yourself, or at least I find myself, naturally gravitating towards doing things that aren't really valuable for the company as a whole. And so where I'm going with that is some things that Caleb has shared already with us is, once you're starting to make some money, then exchange it. I mean, he spent, and I would say invested, $1,500 to solve their key problem forever. They'll never have to worry about a lost key. I mean, maybe a keychain breaks or whatever else, but you're always going to know where those keys are. For $150, like you said, you have a software, at least a piece of a software where people can, and I don't know what you were doing before, but I remember a time when we had people come and literally, like, with a punch card, punch in, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And so, yeah, we're investing or spending a little bit more money, but it's to save time so that we can then take that time and reinvest it in revenue producing or value producing type things. So I want to know, and you've kind of gone a different route than Caleb, but a couple of years ago, you're like, hey, it's out of necessity. I got to start hiring people that can do things for me so I can just see my family on one Saturday a month. As you've done that more and more and more, and you're working less and less and less, how have you chosen to spend your time? Perhaps some of it is still in your business. Hopefully some of it's with family and doing, leisurely things that you like. But what else do you spend your time on now?
So
now that you have it?
That's a great question. So this month is probably not typical, but last week I took a cruise, went down to Mexico. I'm about to take off for 3 weeks, flying out to the Silos, Chip and Joanne, on Friday.
Oh, very cool.
My wife. And then we're going to go and get kind of a lake house for a week. And then we're going to fly down to Florida, maybe hit Disney World, fly over.
So you like to travel. You like to vacation and travel and see things.
I do. And I have a setup basically where I'm at right now. I've made it so my whole entire life can fit in basically a laptop, a cell phone, a notebook, and a bag. And everything I need to do is in this. I remember I talked to one of my customers, and she said she went on vacation, and she literally took 4 giant containers of paperwork, and she would actually have to ship.
Oh my gosh.
On the flight, because she had a cleaning company and she needed every single one of her customers' files. And I remember hearing that, and I'm thinking,
she does know that there's computers, right? We've had those for, did you give her the 4 hour? You're like, hey, you need to read this. This would be really, really good for you. You would love it.
But she eventually just closed down. She didn't even sell. She just closed down her doors. It became too much. And so she just shut down. She just told all her customers, find somebody else.
It is so crazy, Caleb, that you say that, because I've met a few people the last year that they own pest control companies in Phoenix or other markets, and like they want to sell, they want to get something for it, but it is so either disorganized, or the information that's required to even be able to provide a proposal or evaluation for a company is so not readily available that they would just prefer to not put that work in and just like lock the door, throw the key in the street, and not. And I'm not talking like one man shops. I'm talking companies. Some of them do million and a half, $2 million plus. They're just like, it's just too much work to do that. We'll just kind of grind it down. And if customers stay with us, they stay. If not, they don't. But it's like, oh man, people, there's a better way. There's a better way. And you take a little bit of time to do some house cleaning and dust off some of the files and things, and you could polish something up and really have some value there.
Absolutely. A good CRM. Pretty much everybody in the industry uses it nowadays, but if somebody is not using a good CRM, 100%, you need to stop, do not pass go, get a great CRM, make it happen today. And so we were talking about like spending the time. This is a shift for me, but basically I'm making more times to be on podcasts, do more interviews, try to get more into coaching side of things, and then being able to, if I want to, kind of do the workcation thing. Like I don't have to do it at any specific spot. If I want to, I can see the fall colors in Arkansas for a week at a cabin by the lake, and I can work there and be just as effective as working here at my office.
Wonderful. So what do you like, as we kind of start to wind this out, what do you say, or like, how would you speak to the person that's where you were 3 or 4 years ago? Company's growing, you're relatively stressed out, you're working 10 days a week, 25 hours a day. Like, what is the first step that someone would take to take one Saturday a week off, or go from working 12 hours to 11 hours? Where do they begin?
There's a little free book on YouTube called The 2-Second Lean. And
yeah, Paul Akers.
And it's an hour, it's a little over an hour to listen to it. It's free, it's on there. Start there, and they'll give you a lot of ideas, because really, what you're going to be able to do in a month or 2 months or 3 months isn't going to revolutionize your business, but it's one thing on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, that's really going to make that long term. I use the idea of, nobody takes music anymore, but if anybody ever takes music lessons, you don't ever on lesson one, be a master at anything. It takes lesson after lesson. They build on each other. And I would actually just take that hour, listen to 2-Second Lean, and just implement what are things that could make your life 2 seconds a day easier. And if you are consistent with that, it doesn't matter the level, but it's more about the consistency of making sure on a regular basis that your business is run better, it's easier for your people, it's less stressful. And every single day you build upon it, you will notice the compound effect will be amazing. A lot of people want a silver bullet, that what can I do that's going to fix this? I'm at a breaking point. I don't think I can do this one more month. And that's really, really hard to say, well, I'm going to revolutionize it in 30 days. But you can take small things, and then you'll look in 6 months, you're like, oh man, this is so much easier than it was 6 months ago. And then 1 year you'll look back and you're like, I can't believe I did that on a regular basis. And then
I'm glad to like have you say that too, because one, that's like a pretty unpopular idea anymore. Meaning like it really does take effort, and you're not going to go from, and you certainly didn't, and I'm unaware of many people that go from working 6 days a week, 70, 80 hours a week to on Friday, Saturday, and then Monday showing up and it's like, hey, I can literally put in 30 or 40 minutes a day and I'm good. And this thing runs and goes. Like there's progression, there's steps. It gets down to that. Paul Akers is a great friend and a great mentor, and all of his material, you guys need to check it out, is 2-Second Lean. He does these incredible missions to Japan. And you can hop on his YouTube site and his business Fast Cap. There are tons of resources that will kind of help you down that path. So you've mentioned Tim Ferriss and 4 Hour Work Week. That's certainly been influential. Paul Akers and 2 Seconds Laney has a lot of material out there. Has anything else been really helpful or influential to you as you've gone onto this either lean journey or working a little bit less, playing a little bit more? What else has been helpful?
I've actually read about 500 business books through the help of Audible over the last 10 years. And Ready, Fire, Aim is one that I don't hear that a lot. I know a lot like Pumpkin Plan, Profit First, great books, love them. But Ready, Fire, Aim would be a good one if anybody hasn't heard about that one. And I could go down a whole list of great books, but my suggestion to usually people is I usually will ask them a few follow-up questions of like, where are you at? Because the book that you need to read has everything to do about where you're at in your business.
Everyone's at a different place. Everyone.
But I'd go check that one out. It's going from zero to a huge business. So it kind of covers the whole gamut of where maybe anybody is at. And Ready, Fire, Aim. I would go check that book out if anybody is interested.
Amazing. Caleb, thank you so much for carving time out of your day. I know it's important. I know it's valuable. I know it's limited, especially because you're only working 3 or 4 hours a week anymore. So, I mean, this podcast really gobbled up, 25, 30% of the hours that you put into a normal week anymore. So I really am appreciative of it. But very, very cool. Wonderful conversation. If people want to continue this with you, either as it relates to leaning some things down, how you went from where you were working a ton to working a little bit less, even maybe your business and consulting firm, how do people continue the conversation with you? Do you LinkedIn? Do they find?
I would definitely
do a good email.
I have a very unique name, Caleb Irmler. And so when you put that in, and I'm pretty much the only person that pops up with that. So you can just go to LinkedIn, Caleb Irmler, and you won't, some people have, a million people and famous people that have their same name, but I have a very unique name. So I'm not terribly hard to find. And you just connect with me on there and we can pick up the conversation.
Perfect. Caleb Irmler, everybody. Caleb, thank you so much for being on. These drop every Thursday. We're dropping them twice a week until the book launch on November 3rd. And looking forward to spending time with everybody again and there at the launch. And until then, create a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Multiply You podcast. You'll see us again soon when you subscribe for future episodes.